Hello, everyone. Welcome to UNG Media, the weekly show. Let's panel start now. Okay, welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you full house today. We'll be talking about lifting the state of emergency, design miscommunication. That's the topic for today. And we'll start as usual with the format we usually have. What stood out for you during the past week? So we'll start today with Faisal. Faisal, welcome, and what stood out for you the past week?
Thank you, Getachew, and welcome to Scale and Yosef. I think many things happened, but I'll probably pick one issue that's very global this week in the Ethiopian political atmosphere, and that's HR 6600, which, as it's named, to support stabilization, peace, and democratization in Ethiopia. This is a House resolution that has a wide range of issues to address in Ethiopia. I think it is the intent. Well, there are the general issues that are involved in this, as the title calls for. It's seeking to help, not to really stabilize, but to help Ethiopia stabilize its politics and probably promote democracy and ultimately bring peace. It has a lot of rich language in the resolution. The thing is that, those of us who are on the fringes of Ethiopia's political spectrum has been calling for, such as an inclusive, authentic, democratic dialogue, which is not really controlled by the Ethiopian government per se. When I say Ethiopian government, I mean the party that exclusively owns the political domain of Ethiopia, but to make it a public space and create a situation where everybody participates, not only in showing up as hand-picked delegates come, but in shaping and formulating the shape, the agenda, the framework, and everything. And absolutely, that's not what's happening with the current situation. I think the resolution is far-reaching. Some of the issues it has stipulated are very practical and immediate. Others are very long-term, as resolutions are known to have general wish list. For instance, to democratize Ethiopia, in my opinion, is a wish list that the US Congress would like to see. To also create stabilization in the political system is a wish list. But to bring peace and address human genocide and the crime of humanity that has taken place in Ethiopia is not really, in my opinion, a general expression, but an immediate concern for the United States and for the world at large. It's there where really strong language is put. I think the resolution very much speaks about how to address genocide. It also relates genocide to the regulations of US 18 or Section 18 of 1091, which speaks to the definition and the attributes of what genocide is. And genocide in that context, if I just read it, is killing members of an ethnic group or religious or whatever, also causing serious bodily injury to members of that group, be it ethnic or religious or gender, also cause the permanent impairment of mental facilities and faculties of an individual, which we have seen many, many times in the war in Ethiopia. And that impairment of the mental faculties of a person can come through, not providing food or stopping food to go, or medicine to go. It speaks Section 18 U.S. Code 1091 specifically, really, may address other regions and other areas, but it speaks to the heart of the blockade, to the death that's met against people because of blockade as a result of the war and depriving people of the right to feed themselves or others to feed them, which is happening. I think to also cause children to suffer because of public policy carried out by a given government. And I think although TPLF, EPLF, and Ethiopian government are mentioned in the resolution left and right, if I was the Ethiopian government, not only would I worry, but I will really move and study this resolution very carefully and not ignore, but try to turn things around as much as possible and address some of the concerns to be called, because the punishment that is to follow is both financial, political, economic, and even potential imprisonment of the ones who accentuated the war in the country are subject to this. So it's a very far-reaching resolution. It's a serious concern to the European government, although TPLF and Ethiopia, Eritrea are also mentioned, but the bulk of the literature and issues addressed there speaks to what Ethiopian government has been doing for the last year and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Before I move to Yosef, as a reflection on what stood out for him, today, talking about TPLF and Tigray, today is the 47th anniversary of the start of the armed struggle in Tigray called Lekatit 11th. And even on the backdrop of what's happening in Tigray over the last 16 months, people are thinking about this day. And I know President of Tigray, Debretsion, who is also the leader of the TPLF, the ruling party of Tigray, spoke on the occasion, which could be relevant for our discussion today. Yosef, what stood out for you?
Okay, it's what you have mentioned here. Debretzion's speech, I think it was given about 2 days ago, and it has both reassuring in certain. It was both reassuring in certain parts, and also vague in other parts. First, on the reassuring parts. He mentions 5 points, in regard to the non-negotiable parts that he talks about. For example, the state of the status of the army itself, the status of the TDF, or as he put it, the defense of Tigray is non-negotiable, which means it's not going to be part of, the negotiation. It's not going to be disbanded or demobilized or disarmed. That's the first one, and it makes sense because in the end, if there is a peace, in quotation marks, of course, settlement in between the two, then the genocider and the victims will have to live side by side. That's exactly what it's heading to. That's why I call it a solution without resolution. If indeed they come to a certain agreement, the TPLF have to keep its arms in order to protect itself from the neighbors. Eritrea will be fully armed, Ethiopian army, Amhara, Afar, and all of that, So it makes sense. The other one is that what you call it non-negotiable is the territorial integrity of Tigray, which means West Tigray would be non-negotiable, and that also makes sense because that's exactly what the Amhara elites are talking about right now, of making it negotiable. The other one is the Eritrean troops have to get out of Tigray, which is understandable. The fourth one is interesting, referendum, that the Tigrayan people have self-determine their future. That also he mentioned as non-negotiable. And then there is, of course, the accountability issue, the issue of genocide and other humanitarian crimes. those things have to be investigated and pursued. That also, he said, non-negotiable. The reason why these are reassuring is because so many people, on the Tigrayan side, were worrying how much Tigray is going to concede in order to go along the peace process, So that is the reassuring part. What is not so reassuring is when he comes to explaining or describing the peace process or the negotiation process itself, starting from the multiplicity of mediators. He mentions Kenya, the African Union, which is Obasanjo, represented by Obasanjo, and the US, the EU. He doesn't say exactly as they're working in tandem or in parallel. He doesn't say. But he also remains pessimistic on the peace process. He says that while the Tigrayan leadership is for peace in principle, he accuses the enemy to be there only to buy time. So the caution in principle then remains vague, because what does it mean to be there in principle while you have a partner that is there in bad phase? So does it mean that Tigray is there in order to show the world, or the West in particular, that it is sincere in pursuing this process? And if so, it is not going to pay a high price for it? Because how long does it take you? For example, how long does it take you to show the world that you are really sincere in this process, while Ethiopia is not? The time factor, again, the time factor comes into this. He did mention one thing. He mentioned that they have kind of a deadline, they have put some kind of a deadline as where, for example, when it comes to the humanitarian food aid entering Tigray, they have set a deadline. If that deadline is not being met, then the peace process will discontinue. But he doesn't say exactly, it remains really vague on what they have, because here is the problem. As usual, it's a timing program. If the TDF is gonna go back to war, it's not gonna be a war for Addis Ababa. It's not gonna be a war for regime change in Addis Ababa. It's primarily going to be a war for food. That's why there are two options. One is the opening a corridor to Sudan. If you open the corridor to Sudan, then either the food will come to Tigray, or you could take the famished population, many of them, not all of them, to where the food is, which is the Sudan. Now, there is another option into this one. That is not the only place where the food is. If they can't open it for, military reasons, for example, if they are unable to open it, then they have the whole Amhara region. Will they go back to the Amhara region? And precisely because that is where the food is. Nowadays, in Tigray, the tens of thousands of soldiers, to put it at minimum, that have come back from the Amhara land are being fed by the Tigrayan peasants, which means they have become an extra burden to the people of Tigray. Now, if TDF is going to search for food, then they will have to go back to Amhara land, which means that they will have to feed their soldiers in the Amhara. Not only do they have to feed their soldiers in the Amhara land, they will have to find a means where the Amhara peasant is going to share their food with Tigray. So the problem will be a totally different scenario. The kind of scenario that we will face will be a totally different scenario. And I'm not sure exactly where the Tigray leadership will be in this case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yosef. Professor Esquel, what stood out for you the past week? I know there is a lot of things to talk about, but what stood out for you?
Yeah, Just following on what Faisal and Yosef said, what stood out for me is the world, the entire world, is trying to encourage the Ethiopian government to de-escalate political tensions, to help the country come to a consensus that the national dialogue is needed to resolve Ethiopia's multi-dimensional crises. In situations like this, when the country is under the weight of several layers of crisis, military, political, economic crises, when you know about 13.4 million of your people have food insecurity, when there is no ceasefire in place to silence the guns, when you know there is political tension within the ruling party itself and in its relationship with the political system in the country, when you know that foreign forces are roaming the country, this is the kind of situation where you would think that people who are adept with statecraft would try to de-escalate the tension. And that's what the world is trying to do, and that's what the opponents, if I call the Tigray government, the opponent of the government, are trying to do. They're talking the de-escalation of tensions so that there will be some kind of ceasefire leading to negotiated settlement, and probably leading to a national dialogue that might result in some kind of political arrangement and political settlement, and determine the trajectory of the country in the coming 30, 40 years. So in that kind of situation, you think that the Ethiopian government would help the world and its opponents to de-escalate, to lower the rhetoric, the war rhetoric and the drumbeats of war. Instead, I think what the National Electoral Board did was simply escalating the political tension in the country when they are supposed to de-escalate. The reason that I say that they're de-escalating is they know the Prosperity Party is already in preparation to hold general elections. Its very first general elections, because it's never had any general election as required by the proclamation governing the registration of political parties and electoral processes. We haven't heard that. It is basically an illegal party that is ruling the country because it did not do the required activities by law. Now it's been preparing for this for some time, and the committee is named, so they are already preparing to hold their national general assembly as the Prosperity Party. The board knows, the election board knows that the 26 political parties that they reminded or cautioned to hold their elections are not ready. Many of them are not ready. They are not even thinking about it. The reason is the major ones, forgetting about the regional parties and some of the national parties who could bring about their own general elections if they wanted to, because they have all the resources and their leadership is already outside prison, they could do that. But for the Oromo Liberation Front, the entire leadership, the entire top leadership is in prison. The president is under house arrest. The OFC, a few of their leaders have been released, but they're not been active politically to hold their national general assembly. They're just not able to do that. They just don't have the time. The ONLF had been busy with the regional issues. So the major parties that matter, not the fake ones, the one-person parties and all that, are not in a position to hold their elections. So this is basically, it looks like the warning to hold their general elections within a period of 1 month, or else when they know the Prosperity Party is ready already to do it, it simply tells me or signals to me that that the National Electoral Board is ready to delist or cancel these parties from the board and make them illegal. In that kind of situation, the political tension in the country cannot be relaxed. If the political tension cannot be relaxed, there will be no national negotiation. The prospect of continued conflict is actually spurred on by the action of the National Electoral Board. I understand that it is supposed to be independent, that it's following the law, but I don't see there is any imminent election coming on. They could wait. They could just redeem the time. That this is not a time to coerce political parties into holding their general elections. They could do that. They had the discretion to do that, but all of a sudden, the National Election Board is escalating tensions when it was supposed to contribute to de-escalation and lowering of the political rhetoric.
Yeah. In fact, I think in one of the press releases from the Oromia region political parties, they said a significant part of Oromia, you cannot even hold the meeting without having guns. So, I mean, political parties are meant to be without guns. So that speaks to what you are alluding to. So today's topic is lifting the state of emergency. Actually, Agence France Presse mentioned that 3 months earlier than expected. That is the timing. And some are saying it was designed before Abiy Ahmed's travel to Brussels to show something. So is it designed miscommunication? And given that as well, when it comes to the national dialogue, there are different signals being sent from the government. For example, with regards to TPLF, talking about delisting, not delisting from what was listed as a terrorist organization and so on. So let's maybe take the same round. And Faisal, what is your take of the lifting of the state of the emergency and what should we expect after that?
Well, from all indication is and words that are coming from the Ethiopian side, Abiy and his team have been very consistent to still stay course, that they are not delisting the TPLF, that they will never negotiate with TPLF and Ola, because according to them, they are terrorists. They never shy away from saying that. However, I think in the last 2 weeks, there have been a flurry of international visits to Addis Ababa, including Stratford from the US, who went there on the 13th to the 14th, 15th, not covered as in the past, but more of a low-key this time, and had extended conversation with Abiy. Also showed some good gesture from the US to the Ethiopian government by giving $30 million emergency money for the famine. And literally the American diplomats made it clear that up to this point, America has given to Ethiopia over $1 billion in aid and other things. All those were to encourage Abiy to come down from the pedestal of animus that he's sitting on. The same situation from the European front, where there have been talks to bring the rhetoric and the misinformation and miscommunication coming from the Ethiopian side, in the sense that on the one hand, when media talks behind the closed doors are engaged, the Ethiopian government is showing leniency to change course when it's talking to its people, and the people that it has issues with, it's taking a hard stance. So I think we haven't seen any part from the Ethiopian government side to really change its rhetoric, except to lift that emergency regulations in anticipation of the Brussels conference. That we have it. that they did it. The question is, does that really go enough for the peace talks that everybody is waiting for? Ethiopian officials repeatedly told us that they're not changing their position with TPLF and OLA/OLF. Now, it's very possible, and this is a huge speculation, it's very possible that the Ethiopian leadership would like to move very cautiously and carefully to avail its intent to negotiate with TPLF and OLF, but walk very slowly, the same way they did with the emergency, not jump on it quickly, but kind of, that could be one scenario that we don't know. But the other scenarios we know, that's making Abiy and his team and his diplomats to always speak with harsh language when it comes to talking to TPLF and OLA/OLF, is the leadership of Ethiopia is currently leadership in prison. They are prisoners of their own misery that they created. They have put all their political prowess and power in the basket of the extremist Amhara nationalists that's holding Abiy and his team hostage, not to conduct any meaningful and well-meaning, well-intended peace talks with its belligerents. As you watched this yesterday, the demonstration in Washington, D.C. is split between those who want to work with Abiy, the No More Movement team, and the ones who are taking a very hardcore Amhara nationalist attitude. And their chances were really a telling of how Abiy is a prisoner of two forces that are very extreme. They were literally chanting, Abiy is a killer, Shanne is Abiy, Abiy is Shanne. And that meeting and that rally on the phone invited Iskandar Nega, who also pumped up the demonstrators. Now, 3 months ago, these very forces that were calling Abiy Shanne and a killer were the big powers that were lobbying and fighting for him and going all over and demonstrating and calling him a messiah. So he doesn't even have time at this point in time to really entertain how he would approach OLA and TPLF, except to just summarily dismiss them until he lands on a very comfortable position. Up to this point, we have not seen anything, at least in public, where he is willing to talk to the Skurubis. But with the lifting of the emergency at this point in time, we can literally dismiss it as a tactical move. We have seen Abiy, we have watched him for 2.5 years, 3 years. He does it not from the greater good of the country when he does these little things. He does it to just fill a little gap at that particular time. So this little gap was to show to his supporters and to the world that he's working on this issue, but we haven't seen any progressive movement on that.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Abiy reportedly traveled to Asmara to meet Isaias Afwerki on his way to Brussels for the African and European summit. I don't know if we have more information on that, Joseph, but what is your take of this, the lifting of state of emergency? You talk about timing, just these cosmetic changes and buying time in relation to what the president said, or all that. So, what's your take on that?
Well, it falls into that he's trying to buy enough time, avoid sanctions, and buy enough time so that they could do whatever. Their primary goal is to destroy Tigray, finish their genocide. So that comes into. But if we look at it in particular, let's first ask the question: did Ethiopia need the state of emergency in the beginning? I mean, did the Ethiopian government need the state of emergency when it proclaimed it? Was it not doing all it wanted to do prior to the state of emergency? So to me, the lifting of the state of emergency in its particularity, in its specificity, actually throws no light on the general problem that other similar issues have been raised before. It comes, if we look at it, for example, as a particular one in a bigger context, the bigger context being the foreign policy of Ethiopia. How did it work? Does this particular move by Abiy fit into that frame? I remember last time we talked about appearance over reality being, at least I say that appearance over reality is the overarching policy of the foreign policy of Ethiopia. In this case, it means that you only appear to be lifting the state of emergency, but you keep on doing whatever we have been doing before. Whether you lift it or not, you keep on doing whatever that you have been doing before. That seems to be at the center of this. Let's, for example, take, the release of prisoners that have been taking prior to this release of, the lifting of this emergency. Remember, the two most influential political figures in Ethiopia right at this moment are Jawar and Bekele, leaving aside, the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. Now, as Professor Hizkiel has been pointing out, to me it seems that both Jawar and Bekele have been rendered mute and impotent by the government, even though this were given to the West as a signal that the Abiy government is moving along what they are asking. So primarily, if we have looked at the foreign policy of Ethiopia, this appearance of a reality, it's always generated with one audience in mind, and that is the West. It's not done with internal audience in mind. For example, when it, let's say, for example, the case of the national dialogue. If you look at the national dialogue, everybody in Ethiopia realizes that there is no such thing, there won't be any such thing. The only thing that's going to happen is the national monologue. And that monologue will be between PP and PP. That's what's going to happen. They know it, everybody knows it. But when the Abiy government talks about national dialogue, the appearance that it wants to give to the outside world, especially to the West, is that a multiplicity of voices that have not been heard will be heard. And so you have this appearance of a reality that is specially packaged to appeal to the West. So every appearance of a reality that the Abiy government comes has no intention of having an audience, an internal audience. It doesn't even care. So everything is packaged for the West. So this farce, for example, about the national dialogue, as we said before, it has worked so far that Germany and France are scrambling to get a front VIP seat in this national dialogue. Or take, for example, the humanitarian aid. If you look at the humanitarian aid, again, Ethiopia, at this point in time, the Ethiopian government at this cannot deny that no food is making it into Tigray. But it has created, again, at a different level, an appearance over reality on this one. What it did is two things. One is it created confrontation along the main entrance roads into Tigray, through Afar, through Kobo, and Wajia, that area. And then there is the Adarkai in the west. It creates confrontations so that now the appearance that it created was that Now that there is a confrontation, the TPLF is to be blamed for these confrontations, and there is no way we could deliver the food because the TPLF is creating these confrontations at these particular places. This appearance of a reality was bought soon after that by OCHA, none other than OCHA, and claimed that it couldn't move the food precisely because there is confrontations at the border. The other one is this divide and rule method. Divide and rule, when we talk about divide and rule, usually it means that the division and the rule takes place over one particular population. But in this case, it's flipped. What they have created, the appearance that the Abiy government has created was that there is a division among its partners. A divide that doesn't exist. In reality, it doesn't exist. That divide is between the Abiy government, the Afar Kullul, the Amhara Kullul, and also, of course, the Eritrean government. So the appearance that it gives is that if there is a divide, then it is those particular groups that are preventing food aid from entering Tigray, not the Abiy government. Now, who buys this narrative? Debretsion mentioned that one in his last speech. He said that the mediators, which are of course the EU, the AU, and the others, whenever we mention to them that the food aid is not entering into Tigray, they keep telling us, but it's not Abiy that is blocking it. He's trying his best. It is the Amharas or the Afars or the Eritreans that are blocking the road. So, in a way, this appearance of a reality, this overarching policy of the foreign policy of the Abiy government has been working for him up to this day, and he's pursuing this latest move of him, this lifting of the emergency in Ethiopia is part of that process. That's why I don't want to dwell on that particular problem only, because it has been working for him. The question that we have to ask is, why is the West has been buying this thing up to this day? This is, in fact, the most important question that we should ask, because there are various reasons for that one. I will stop here, though. Okay.
Thank you, Yosef. Professor Rizkel, again, on the same topic of the state of emergency, what is your assessment of how it was lifted and why it was lifted and what's next?
Well, to be sure, Ethiopia, at least most of Ethiopia, had been under a state of emergency for the greater part of 4 years. But to speak to the state of emergency that was put in place to prosecute the war, or at least ostensibly to help the prosecution of the war, it was not needed. As Yosef was just saying, that it was not needed to prosecute the war. The Ethiopian government is not restricted by any law to do just about what it wants. Killing anybody it wants, in fact, to the point of killing people, innocent people, calling them shani and burning their bodies throughout Oromia. That kind of defiling of human dignity is going on, and you don't need a state of emergency for that at all. They didn't need a state of emergency to rape, to maim, to kill, and to commit atrocities, unimaginable and indescribable atrocities. So that it was not needed. The state of emergency was not needed to round up thousands and tens of thousands of Tigrayans in Addis Ababa and in Ethiopia, all over Ethiopia. It was not needed. Right after the war started in November, they were able to do that. So to imprison, to torture, to confront whoever they called enemies, to burn down homes, there was no state of emergency that was needed. It was not meant to prosecute the war. Second, if, as the Ethiopian government says, the state of emergency is to assist with the prosecution of the war, lo and behold, the war has not ended anywhere. War is going on almost everywhere. Around Tigray in the north, in western Ethiopia, it has even escalated. Southern Ethiopia escalated. In central Ethiopia, it escalated. So if this was an instrument to fight their war, well, the war hasn't ended, so there is no need to lift it at this point in time. And thirdly, the third point in this is that it was lifted maybe to give that appearance that Abiy is preparing for the resolution of the political problems that had immersed the country into a civil war. Well, that probably had helped because he was having so many pictures with so many heads of state and heads of government. He was doing that. He was really trumpeting the idea that Ethiopia is back on the diplomatic circuit, showing that any picture that he could take with a head of government is immediately on the social media. So that, to that extent, it had probably helped duping and confusing Western governments who are also predisposed to accept whatever he is doing in the absence of, in their views, in the absence of any other resource to resolve the conflict. So if this was meant to do anything to resolve the conflict in the country, what should have been done was not simply lifting the state of emergency, but also releasing all those who were imprisoned under the state of emergency. And there is no indication that they're going to do this. In fact, in the meeting that they had with the board, the issue of release of political Oromo Liberation Front political prisoners was raised. What the representative of the Prosperity Party said is that, why is it that you don't understand? This is trying to translate and quote it. Why is it that you don't understand when we release the leaders of or members of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, such as Siddharth Nega, and leaders of the KFO, or the Oromo Federalist Congress, OFO, when we released them, and even released the TPLF, but did not release leaders of the OLF, that should have telegraphed a message to you that we're not intending to release them whatsoever. So there is no political benefit to the state of to the alleged lifting of the state of emergency. So it was not necessary for the war in the first place, and it's not paving the way for the peaceful resolution of the conflict or negotiated settlement of the war right now. The Ethiopian security apparatus is full force, doing what they had done before and intending continuing to do what they have been doing. So I do not see any benefit, any meaning, any substantive meaning that the lifting of the state of emergency had done, because the individuals arrested under the state of emergency, they're not been released. The Tigrayans, by the way, the Tigrayans, people of Tigrayan descent all over, especially in and around the city of Addis Ababa, they are still imprisoned, and more are still being imprisoned. And as what you're showing shows that the line for those people who are trying to support them in prison, the line is growing. So I don't understand what this state of emergency would ever mean, except that this is another iteration of the drama and hoodwinking of the international community by the Abiy government that is known, very well known, for manipulating images and managing public relations, as Joseph likes to say, pulling appearances over reality. That much it had done with the state of supposed release of state of emergency.
Great, thank you, Professor Edgar. We would be remiss, if we are not mentioning what happened this week in Jigjiga, despite or on the backdrop of this lifting of the state of emergency. So this is, I think they recorded it on cell phone. Let me just play that, and Faisal will be great.
Yeah, while you are getting that, let me just quickly say I think we are debating a mute issue when it comes to the Westerners, in the sense that Abiy creating a sort of like an image, or do they really believe what he's doing? Do they really take the lift of emergency seriously, and all other things? We have to understand that the West's mind is different than our mind. Our priorities are different than ours. Their priority is incremental. As long as they see Abiy even verbally telling them that he's willing to change, they will give him the benefit of the doubt more than sequencing and at least sort of prioritizing removing the blockade. I think they were babysitting him in the sense that they're saying, yes, we really like to feed the Tigray people or stop the bloodshed in Oromia, but who can do that is the question that they raise, and it's Abiy. So what do we need to do with Abiy? Do we need to fight with Abiy, or we try to babysit him until he comes around? So all these things that we are seeing, there's no insignificant pressure from the West. We have to understand that the U.S. government has been dealing with Noriega and, the former dictator of Zaire for many years, until they hit the wall and they can no longer shoulder him. I think they will go at any length. They may do little things here and there, but as long as Abiy is saying the right words, and then when we challenge them, they can show this and share with us those right words that Abiy is telling them, they're satisfied. Their constituents is not us. Their constituents is people who see dying kids or war in CNN and what have you. And as long as that subsumes, it will take 2, 3, 4 years of incremental but meaningless change that Abiy can do, and the West and the US would be satisfied. So I think they are incrementalists and they will do little things here and there. And B, as long as they don't have pressure from their voters and from inside the US or activists and what have you, they can listen more to Abiy than to anybody else, even if the blockade is there. I mean, here you have 6 million people, and we are debating, when I say we, the West and Abiy, we are debating like, is it the Afaris who stopped the food? Is it the TPLF or TDF who stopped the food? Knowing that TDF would want to feed its people no matter what, even if they are the worst asinine, they would like to feed and give that mother who needs a diabetic, So all these gimmicks just gives Abiy enough room, and the West would say that, he's trying his best and let's give him a chance. So I think I'm not really convinced that the West doesn't know what Abiy is doing. I think they know everything. They can even see through satellite who is not letting the food go in. It's so finite information is available to them that if TDF and TPLF is stopping the food to go to Mekelle, that's another thing. But I think it defies human rationality to just say that, the blockade is again in an argumentative kind. I don't buy that. I think the US knows Abiy is stopping. But they don't want to offend him. They want to babysit him with the hope that they will bring him along, and that could be pie in the sky.
Mm.
No me
What are we seeing here in the Somali regional state happening this week, Faisal?
This is taking place in a small town called Aubarre, 65 miles to the northwest of Jigjiga. In the Ethiopian official papers, they call it Teferibar. This is where Haile Selassie passed through when he was escaping in the Second World War to go to Djibouti or somewhere. And between this town and Jigjiga, 65 miles, there are 7 stops, Kelo, they call it, 7 stops where people are harassed and checked and looted by the police and by the government. 7 steps in 65 kilometers, mind you. And the initial conflict took place with a confrontation of 2 high school graduates who were on their way to apply for university. I believe one of them or 2 of them, both of them got an admission somewhere. But nonetheless, they were killed point blank by the local forces. And then that caused that eruption you see, and police shooting at live, bullets shooting at people. Up to this point, that town is not, stable. This is the 7th city within a short period of time that similar or worse thing happened in the region. As you know, in the last 3 weeks, because of the political heat coming up from different parties that want to challenge Mustafa, so many mishaps have taken place in the region. A lot of former leaders of the region have been arrested and some of them released. Members of the party who wanted to call themselves the correction team or the reorientation of the PP have also been arrested. Some of them escaped and left Jigjiga and hiding. Even Habib Haji, who is known among the Ethiopian community in the West Coast, because for many, many years, in the 2000, all the way until the change came around, he was the Assistant General Consulate of the Los Angeles Consulate General here locally. So he's known. He's one of the really, if you call cosmopolitan, urbane person that I have seen, very peaceful guy. He's in jail up to this point. So technically speaking, again, talking about lifting emergency, the Somali region is under its own emergency regulation, and people cannot speak. People are being arrested. There's another video that you haven't got a chance to share, where summary arrests of people who are suspected to oppose the government. When they say government, Mustafa as in person, have been arrested. Their families have been harassed. There's this culture in Jigjiga where a bunch of police on their trucks and SUVs come, jump over your fence to your house when the kids and family are sleeping, and literally do a Gestapo work on families. And that's happening as we speak today and yesterday and last night. I was being called several times by people, and people are at edge. The hotel that the first group who were arrested had their meeting, a privately owned, well-known, the second largest hotel in Jigjiga called Sahel, has been ransacked and literally rendered useless and not usable. The lady who owns that hotel, Sahel, is also under tense pressure from the government. So Abiy can say whatever he wants, but I think the country and particularly this region is in shambles. On top of that, just you have the vulgarity of the president, who just in a recent speech said that if Somalis refuse to help to have the Amara residents participate in their local, meaning Somali regional administration, that region is a South Africa type apartheid. So literally, even if the Somalis said we don't want Amara settlers to be part of the government, to call in their face Somalis that they are practicing apartheid, people who have been really under subjugation and humiliation for over 100 years. It's just what Somalis are calling beyond normalcy. They don't really consider this to be a normal politics. And on top of that, over $1.5 billion have been spent within the last several days, if you will, since we exposed the famine. When I say we exposed the famine, they denied until we started writing. And they had 3-4 months OCHA warning that the famine was imminent. And just to share with you guys, I've been tweeting on a daily basis this small district in El Karre area that has been begging for water. Till today, they haven't responded. Last night, I got a call from the imam of a small town, call it Kutiri, where the guy said, let them cut my, and this is how he put, let them cut my throat. I want to speak to the media. And finally, I was able to connect him to Karamarra TV, which is now airing a lot of original and ground bottom-up type information. So I hope they will interview him. But it's really, if Abiy is not aware of what's happening in that region, well, he's probably on some, he must be drinking Kool-Aid, in my opinion.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is from the specific situation in Jigjiga and in the region in general, and from what each one of you said, there seems to be a demand, and at least an implicit demand for miscommunication, both domestically and internationally, and Abiy is good at supplying it. So maybe let's go to the final words for the day. So, Joseph, what's your final word for the day?
Okay, I will keep with the subject matter that we have been talking about. I agree with Faisal in the sense that the West knows exactly what's going on. It's not fooled by the appearance of a reality thing. But here is my the difference that I have is why does the West buy this appearance of a reality thing? I think there are two different groups. One is they are not naive enough to believe the reality itself, the appearance itself. But what they are doing is that they have been forced. There is a group that have been forcing itself to believe in it. There is a difference between somebody believing it and forcing itself to believe in it, simply because they don't see any alternative, according to them, any other alternative than Abiy at this particular point in time to stabilize or to unite Ethiopia, according to them. So they keep themselves, forcing themselves to believe in the things that he comes up with. This is not exactly believing the appearance, but what they do is that they take the appearance as being part of the process, as a work in progress. So there is no, for them, there is no appearance versus reality. It's a continuum between appearance and reality. So the appearance takes them to the reality itself. So whenever he does, for example, something like what he has done with lifting the state of emergency in Ethiopia, they would say that is the correct move, but they will yet you will have to do this and this, more do this and this. In every appearance versus of a reality that he came up with, they always say this is a good move, this is a good move, but more needs to be done. So it has become some kind of a spectrum that they have been exercising when it comes to what the Abiy government has been doing. So they say that he's in the right direction, but he needs that further progress is needed. In that case, we'll have, as Faisal said, for example, maybe years to to wait. But the problem is the crisis in Ethiopia, and particularly now in Tigray with the famine and the diseases inside Tigray. I mean, it doesn't go parallel, you know. Whatever sanctions they have proposed and they are proposing now, they have imposed and they are trying to impose now, all of them fall short of the timing, of the time factor. The other one, the other group, I believe, is more sinister than this one. Why is that? They know exactly what he's doing and keep encouraging him to come up more with this appearance of reality scenarios. Why do they keep encouraging him? Is that he's not only providing a cover to himself and to his government, but he's also providing a cover to them to keep doing whatever it is that they want to do. A good example would be the EU. Despite its protestations, despite its constant call for humanitarian aid in Tigray, the EU seemed to be at peace, or at least satisfied with the state of affairs in regard to Tigray right now. Tigray remains encircled. Tigray remains encircled, and no refugees are allowed to get out from Tigray to reach Sudan. That has been, for example, one of the issues that the EU is afraid of. Migration has been its primary concern in this crisis. So far as the refugees, the possible migrants are kept inside Ethiopia, then it seems that it's willing to see, to give it a blind eye at this particular in time. So these are the very people that keep promoting the appearance versus over reality scenarios of Abiy. So they are not only accepting his appearance over reality scenarios, but they are encouraging him to come with more of them, so that they could say there is indeed progress going on. So to me, it goes simply, the division is rather murky. Sometimes we don't exactly know exactly, are they promoting these scenarios, or are they simply accepting it, or are they accepting it for pragmatic reasons, and then they want further progress. So it really remains murky in many regards. But their primary concern, seeing Ethiopia as a huge market, the geopolitics of it, and the migration problem have a lot to do with accepting Abiy's theatrics in itself. It's giving them ammunition to say, okay, you see, we have come this far, and there is a lot of progress going on. They don't mind, in the meantime, if genocide is taking place in Tigray. For all practical purposes, they are collaborators in the genocide of Tigray, especially the EU and the UN especially, with all its excuses that it comes up. It seems to me they are collaborating in this genocide of Tigray. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Professor Etiel, final words for the day.
Perhaps where I started, that wherever I started at the beginning, saying that the escalation is going on in the idea that there will be some kind of cessation of hostilities and unhindered humanitarian access, and then negotiations leading to political settlement is really not in place. The reason I say this is the West, the entire West, the United States, the multilateral agencies, and the European Union have made up their minds. They've made up their minds at this point in time that the Horn of Africa region, if it's not stabilized, and if they keep putting pressure and demands on Abiy Ahmed, and to some extent even Isaias Afwerki, that they might lose them to China and Russia. That has spooked them. And when they look at Abiy Ahmed, and even Isaias Afwerki, when they look at Abiy in particular, they consider him a political moderate, or they call him a moderate. He's moderate. And this is what I hear from policymakers, that he's considered now a moderate who is really drawn into doing what he had done in Tigray and elsewhere, particularly by Amhara fundamentalists and fascists and Isaias in the north. Other than that, he is really a moderate man who is in favor of liberal economics in the country, market-driven economics in the country, and politically also moderate, which simply means that he's not for ethnic politics. He really wants to steer the country into an ideological debate and political debate, that he is a political moderate. That's what it really means. So the other thing that concerns them is that if in Ethiopia, with 120 million people, political authority collapses, the repercussions throughout the Horn and maybe beyond will be disastrous. And they will be the West is going to be the ones that are going to be called on to put out the fire and remain in that place for a long time. Given this situation, they have decided that the best way to try to stabilize the situation is not to insist on human rights, is not to insist on overt democratization, but to accept what is plausibly possibly one that has the best chance to stabilize the country. It's not about human rights, it's not about democratization, it's not about representation, it is simply about security and stability. What they do not understand is, and I speak like from some kind of conversations with them, what they don't understand is the Ethiopian constitution is a moderate one. It's actually the most liberal constitution. Because they don't pay attention to the greater part of the constitution, they only look for faults in the constitution that they think had led to the conflicts today. And I've heard the person, the United Nations person in charge of genocide, actually saying something close to saying that it is the constitution that is fueling conflict. What they don't understand is that the multinational federation that Ethiopia put in place, which they call ethnic federation, was actually a middle ground between total secessionism and unitarism, that it is a compromise in the Ethiopian context. And to be sure, a lot of countries are also moving in that direction. There are more multinational federations in the world today than there were in the early 1990s. So they don't understand that situation, that the multinational federation actually is a well-crafted solution to Ethiopia's age-old problem of called the nationalities question, that they cannot understand, that they cannot even bring to understand, because they don't have the prism to look at this through the eyes of Ethiopians and Ethiopian history. What they don't understand is that what Abiy is trying to do is to push down the throats of the majority of Ethiopians. The majority of Ethiopians, that he's pushing through their throats to accept non-ethnic politics, a moderate politics, that they don't understand that the Somali, the Oromo, the Tigrayans, the Afar, the Kimans, all of these are demanding self-rule. That they're not paying attention to it, and they don't have the prism to look at it. They just don't have it. This is the problem of at least American policy making, that they have their prisms. For instance, with regard to the Soviet Union, the reason that they even failed to predict that it was going to collapse is because they have this prism called Kremlinology. That there are Kremlinologists who are experts in Soviet politics, And they are the ones that know what the United States government needs to do. So they don't take into account the realities on the ground. They look at the ground through their own prism. Therefore, they always miscalculate. And there is no shortage of examples where Americans have analyzed situations through their own framework, and they have always ended up miscalculating, even in Ethiopia. Even in Ethiopia, they have miscalculated several times. So that is what is going to happen, that the West is trying to schmooze over all of these problems. They now have Abiy as their man, but they really don't understand that he is not governing, but trying to push down through the 70%, 80 or 85% of the Ethiopian population to accept going back to the imperial years when Ethiopia was supposedly at peace and everything was dandy at that time. That's what he is telling them. That's what they're accepting. That's what they understand, because the framework in which they filter all of these things is not based on the realities on the ground.
Was it only from my side? I was kicked out. Please, did you finish? Because I was kicked out.
Yes, I am finished. That the escalation is going to go, and whatever the West is doing is not going to do anything to de-escalate.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was kicked out. I don't know why. Faisal, the final words for the day is yours.
Yeah, I will just pick it up where Skia left. I think the state of emergency lifted had a very stated goal from Abiy's point of view, and he achieved that. It doesn't mean the emergency is gone, as we saw in Jigjiga and Somali region and probably the entire Oromo region, and forget Tigray. The country is in its own de facto long-term emergency. So the gimmick of lifting the emergency was designed exactly what the title speaks to, which is miscommunication to the outside world. I think we achieved that as a panel. I think what we have also need to focus, which is where Scale left, is the fact that if the West is pampering Abiy with the intent to achieve a stabilized Horn of Africa, well, they must be dreaming. The last 50, 60 years, the Western politics vis-a-vis the Horn of Africa, which was mainly to work with the existing structure, has never earned us stability. They worked through Haile Selassie. Eritrea was fighting. TPLF and Oromo and Somalis were fighting. And they only came around after the establishment that they were supporting didn't win the war. I don't think that the West and the State Department, if you will, understand is the question of Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa in the same way that we understand. They prioritize stability from their strategic point of view. We prioritize stability from the point of view of rights and respect and participation and participatory system of governance. Actually, the dichotomy between, or the similarity between how the West is addressing our question and the way the United States, with the white privilege, addresses black versus white issue is the same. The little one doesn't get priority and attention in the American frame of mind. That's also applied to us. Their stability is more strategic, more commerce, more military. Our strategic interest goes beyond that. And this is, as Scale was really alluding to, our struggle is one that continued for many, many years, and it hasn't stopped. It lulled a little bit, and we wanted that to go forward. The West doesn't really see it that way. They want to work with the administration and the structure that is around that time with the agenda that leader has it. Prime Minister Abiy has his own agenda. The West works around, with that agenda. They don't work around that agenda. And for those of us who are insiders, that agenda is really relegating us to the abyss. It's relegating us to the periphery, whereas very few groups are coming to the center. So I think we will miss the boat if we try to align our view with the way the West sees. The West sees Abiy as the supreme ruler, and as long as he converses them in a more so-called, as Scale was saying, moderate way, they will take it. At the end of the day, they are not the owners of the country. They are not the owners of the issues that we are digesting. They're just investors in the issue. And whom do they invest the issue with? The very person who is sitting at the table at that time, and this time is Abiy. So I'm not satisfied the way the West has been approaching this question. For Somalis, I think we grew up and we've been raised with a mentality that the West has never helped or stood next to us. See, I come from that point of view where the West always undermined the ambitions of our people, and they still continue doing that. So they may try to move back or work with Abiy to even get rid of the multinational federal system that we had. A Somali would say that's not new because they were involved in 1954 handover of the Howden Reserve area to Ethiopia. They have, even in the middle of that socialist state of Mengistu Haile Mariam, the US was always favoring the Ethiopian government. So I think Abiy achieved the goal that he wanted with the emergency lifting. I think he made his communication to mislead the world. And also it gave him a face saving to stand tall beside other people that he was avoiding until now. He was avoiding, as we know, the last few months, Western and European leaders because they were suspecting of his hand is carrying blood. Now that has been washed and he's feeling comfortable to drink coffee or wine with them. Who is not feeling comfortable with this scenario is the people either who have been under blockade, such as Tigray, or the Oromos who have been killed in hundreds, or even the Somalis who are now facing the wrath of their own leader. By the way, just let me conclude by just citing one interesting example of how an autocrat creates a regional autocrat. There was a Somali politician who used to say that a sergeant in a small town is worse than a sergeant in the capital city. I think where I'm driving this at is Mustafa was talking to Somalis this week, and he was responding to what he thinks the criticism against him, that people are questioning the parliament that he put together. And he said, why are you guys criticizing me? Because the very parliament that Abiy put together is a fake one with no constitutional process, and mine is the same as his. So why do you accept his and not accept mine? This is exactly what that Somali politician was saying. A small dictator sometimes could be more dangerous than the dictator at the center. So I think we are producing small autocrats in Oromia, in the Somali region, in Benishangul. These guys are all getting their blessing from Ethiopia, and Ethiopia's commentary today is worse and sad than it was before.
Thank you so much, and we'll be monitoring what might come up in the next 7 days before we meet again on Friday next week. Thank you for your time, and good night from here. You have been following us live on Facebook and YouTube. This is the weekly H panel from UMD Media. We were discussing lifting the state of emergency, designed miscommunication. That's the topic we handled today, and we'll be back with the full house next week. And please subscribe, share, like, so that many can access our material. And Shmelis will be back. Shmelis Merasa Gabriel will be back with both Amharic and English update, news update from UMD Media tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So tune in back tomorrow, Saturday, February the 19th. And we will be coming back again Friday next week with the H panel. This panel for today is over and we are signing off.